Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for coming, or at least staying for my talk. So building a world-class product, 5 ways to do more with less. So no matter whether I've worked for huge companies such as Nike or L'Oreal, or all the way back to like kind of more startup, scale-up companies like Deliciella, all companies want you to be able to do more with the resources that you have available to you. So throughout my career, it has been very helpful being able to kind of adopt that mindset and making more from what I have. So what to expect in the next 15 minutes. First of all, I've tried to distill 12-ish years within the industry into what I think are the 5 most salient, important points, and how I've learned to make more from the resources I have available, whether that's time, team, budget. So I'm going to go into that. And then I've really tried to make them as actionable and helpful as possible, so they're not kind of like lofty concepts that you're going to use in 5 years' time, or not at all. And then lastly, I've tried to also make it like real-life solutions to actual problems that you have working in tech, so it actually will be helpful in your day job, I hope. So when you leave this room, you can actually implement some of the things I've spoken about. So first of all, I should probably introduce myself. So hi, I'm Lisa. I have spent the last 12-ish years working within kind of marketing and also digital products. So I'm just going to spend 60 seconds just telling you kind of my career highlights, just so you can understand why I'm here talking to you. So first of all, graduated uni, I got a job at AKQA, which is one of WPP's big kind of digital innovation agencies, and I worked primarily on the Nike business whilst I was there. Nike Training Club was one of the first kind of major projects I worked on, which back in 2013 was one of the first fitness apps on the market and really kind of helped, I guess, establish that sector within the category. I also helped work on one of the first Alexa skills back in the day for the Echo launch in the UK, and then a lot of random other projects, such as helping launch Instagram channels back in the day, and then a random one where I went to the Philippines for 3 months and filmed a reality TV basketball series, but that deserves its own presentation, to be honest. I then moved to New York for a bit and worked on L'Oreal's business. So I did a foundation finder for Maybelline, where we took people's photos and recommended the kind of right foundation shade. I then moved back to the UK and got a job at SoulCycle, which is, as a spinaholic, it was great. I helped them launch in the UK and kind of took on their international markets. And then the pandemic happened, so I pivoted and then joined Deliciella, and as of last year, I've been head of app there. So I look after everything from kind of product roadmap, managing third parties and dev agencies, to content strategy and pricing and everything else that falls on my plate. So let's get into it. Tip number 1, get familiar with failure. And bear with me on this one, because when I showed my sister this presentation, she was like appalled that was my first tip. But it's more around kind of moving away from the stigma of failure into something that we kind of want to forget and put in a box and forget ever happened, but actually looking at it as a learning opportunity and something that will ultimately help us get to where we want to be much quicker. I think there's a real movement at the moment around kind of reframing failure. So the likes of Brené Brown, Matthew Syed, Adam Grant, they're really helping us embrace it as a learning opportunity. And as Henry Ford says, the only real mistake we make is one that we don't learn anything from. And I think this kind of moving away from that kind of stigma is really important. And everyone in here is a human, I believe. And so that means none of us are perfect. So we're going to have to get used to not getting things right all the time. And I think Adam Grant's come up with this kind of very helpful scorecard where as long as you go into things with enough vigor and buy-in, you actually can't fail. If it goes well, great, you've just found an improvement. But if it doesn't go well, it was an experiment. As long as you take those learnings and apply them to what you're going to do next, then it actually is not a waste of time at all. It's actually probably even more helpful. So to distill this into something that is hopefully helpful, so first of all, we all work in digital, which is great because it's actually a really reactive platform to work in. So you're not having to wait ages to get the data that you need to understand if it worked or not. And also it's much easier to kind of be reactive as well. I have had many experiences not working in digital where you've seen an error on like a print ad, which we had at SoulCycle, where we put hoardings up over one of the studios and realized that it had the US spelling of traveled, which was not great. So, had to then go and get it redone, whereas in digital, you are allowed to be, and you can be much more reactive. And if you're not doing it, your competitors certainly are. So I'd say get your hands dirty and start testing and learning as fast as, basically now. small but mighty. So what I've learned is that, it might be quite overwhelming to make a whole change to your onboarding flow. So the best thing to do is to just use a small percentage of your audience traffic to test out ideas. So make it meaningful enough that you're able to kind of have insights that you can roll out. So say 10 or 20%, but don't do it with 100% because if it doesn't work, then you haven't compromised your entire onboarding flow. So that way you can kind of shelter yourselves from things if they don't go to plan, but you're able to get those meaningful insights that you can then roll on. And then lastly, this point is more around the kind of that fostering of a culture of learning. Reward experimentation, document and share when things don't go to plan, because there's no point working in teams where you're all making the same mistakes in different silos. That's not going to get anyone anywhere quickly. So the more you can kind of foster and reward and share those learnings, the better for everyone, really. Right, number 2. Just ask. So this is kind of around either asking your audience or asking your network. So let's do audience first. I have never asked audiences something and they've been like, why are you angry at me for doing it? I think gone are the days of creating like a product in a vacuum and then just releasing it on launch day. It's a really great way to kind of reward engagement, and it's actually a really good retention tactic as well. And the good news is you don't need snazzy user testing platforms. If you have them, great. Good for you. But if you don't, even something as simple as a Google form in an email can really help you start getting really meaningful insights from your users that you can build kind of your product roadmap off. And it's something you can do really cheaply and instantly. So yeah, ask your audience. There's absolutely no shame. And as I said, it's actually a really good retention tactic for really engaged users. They love it. And number 2, use your network. Ask your network. I think if you were just to leave this room with one thing, I would hope it would be this. Ask to be introduced to people who have skills in areas that you don't know. Like I've used this so much in the last few years. An example being, at the start of last year, we decided that we wanted to redo the look and feel of the Feel Better app because we didn't feel it represented wellness that well. But at the time, I was like, I don't know any UI designers that are not in a full-time contract. So I started asking my network, introduced me to someone who introduced me to someone, so on, so on. And eventually we found an amazing UI designer. But the point being, that wouldn't have happened if I didn't put my hand up and ask. And you'd be so surprised at how willing people are to help as long as you ask. If you start now, then it will become one of the most valuable assets that you have in your career. And an old boss told me that don't only network when you're looking for a job or when you think you're kind of senior enough that people want to listen to you. Start today. So, yes. Number 3, grow smart. So this is more around if you're kind of like in this kind of startup scale-up mode, but I know it's always really hard to kind of justify the investment for development of a feature that you would only see the kind of returns for like 12 plus months away. I get that. But another old boss told me it's pain now or pain later. And trust me when I say it's better to do it now than further down the line. So things like prioritizing smart, sustained growth over quick wins, such as 9 times out of 10 is always like, it's so much cheaper just to hard code something, but I promise you, 9 times out of 10, you are going to want to change that 3 months down the line. And so you're going to have to unpick all the development work that you've done. It will cost you more money and more time, and you should have just made it customizable by the CMS in the first place. So things like also making sure that every feature that you build has A/B testing functionality is another thing that, again, at the time, you're like, oh, it's more money, it's more time, but it will pay you back so much in the future. Your future self will thank you. And then lastly, and I hope this one's quite obvious, but thought I'd say it, knowledge is power. So data, again, if you're kind of a startup scale-up, investing in data is so important, and it is really chunky in terms of budget. But even if you can't afford to have a kind of dedicated analyst or data scientist, having a platform that the likes of you and your team are able to access that data easily and not laboriously and quickly is going to pay you back beyond measure, and it's something that you should invest in from the get-go. Okay, on the home straight. Sweat the small stuff. So when you're working at apps, there's just, there's so many things you can be doing. Like, do I look at my CRM and try and plug the leaky bucket for retention, or do I focus on building a brand new feature that I hope will, bring on new users, or do we look at our acquisition and spend time looking at the App Store profile page and experimenting there? It can get really overwhelming, especially if you're in a small team. And so what I've learned to do is kind of look at your overall user journey and identify the most valuable part, the area where you're not doing as well as you'd like to, but you can see the opportunity for improvements and really hone in on that. I think gone are the days, sadly, of a silver bullet just solving all your problems, and you're actually going to get your bottom line, impact your bottom line through like small percentage points increases. So a percentage point here, a percentage point there, they all seem really small, but they all add up, and that is where you're going to be able to kind of start moving the needle. An example being, at Glaciella, we were looking at our conversion rate because we were like, oh, it's not as good as what we'd like to be, and we believe it can be better. So we just went in and kind of tested out like messaging, imagery, the onboarding flow, the welcome offer, and just really honed in there versus looking at the entire kind of app as a whole and being like, oh my goodness. So it's much better to kind of look at one small area versus trying to do a lot of things, but only half-heartedly. And number 5, SWOT up. So often you probably don't have that much control on things like budget, maybe the team that you'd like, or kind of contractors or freelancers that you're able to work with. But what I guarantee that you have control of is yourself, and as a valuable asset to the team, to the project, and to your career. And so one of the things I would really encourage you is making yourself the most valuable asset as possible. So 3 ways that I've learned to do this. 1, get out. You're already here, so that's great. But continue going to industry conferences, expand your knowledge pool within the industry, meet like-minded people who work in the industry, because we know networking is great. Number 2, be a super user. If you aren't using your app every day, why on earth will your users be? And I think you will also miss out on finding valuable insights to how your most engaged users are using the app to be able to figure out what can make them want to use it more, share it with more of their friends. Like, crudely speaking, you have 80% of your revenue comes from 20% of your users or customers. So if you don't know exactly how they're using the app, you're really missing a trick. And also, download all of your competitors' apps. Be their super user. Like, I've got a whole folder on my phone of fitness and wellness apps, and the ideas that it sparks to help us inform our future strategy has been really, really helpful. And lastly, read around the subject. So don't just read on apps, which will be great, but also things like behavioral economics, marketing trends, choice architecture. All of this will really help you kind of find new opportunities and ideas when looking at problems that you might not have known before. I've kind of created a really short list, and you can come and find me later if you want me to share it with you. But things like Think Again by Adam Grant, really helpful in encouraging you to look at problems differently and become a more persuasive person. It's amazing. Nudge, it's probably written by the godfathers of choice architecture. It has inspired many a government nudge squad. Elements of Choice is another kind of book that riffs on that as well. It's absolutely fascinating, to be honest. Black Box Thinking, Embracing Failure, Thinking Fast and Slow is what I'm reading now, and it's fascinating. A few podcasts. Driver CEO is probably quite an obvious one on how I built this, but again, really inspiring stories. And then TED Talks, Simon Sinek and Brené Brown. They're the most popular on the platform for a reason. So as a starting point, really helpful just to kind of broaden your knowledge. Right, so in summary, get familiar with failure. It's not something that we want to put in a box. We want to embrace it and use it as an opportunity to learn. Just ask. Ask your audience and ask your network. Start today. Grow smart, so look at your whole user journey and identify the area that you're going to get the most value from. Silver bullet days are gone, unfortunately, I think. Sweat the small stuff. Sweat the small stuff, and then SWOT up. So become more interesting in the kind of topic and make yourself a more valuable person for the team and also ultimately your career. Thank you so much.